Hey everybody, welcome to Watches with Dennis, and it has been quite a while since I have done a live stream, but I decided it's been enough of a work week, let's go ahead and do it. Now, lately I have been putting out a number of videos, I think 3 at this point, because they seem to be doing fairly well, regarding understanding what's going on with the market, understanding what's going on with the watch pricing in particular, more so than, say, the stock market or anything along those lines. And so I thought, let's go ahead and let's do a live stream and have a conversation about that. Now, for those that aren't familiar, or for those that are first looking into this, it's started to get a lot of attention. I'm sure I was not the first to talk about the watch prices and what the changes we have been seeing have been. But broadly speaking, I would say that since about the start of April, we've started to see a decline in the pricing on watches. Now, how much of a decline depends a lot on the watch. If we're thinking really broadly about the most popular watches that are currently traded, we are not remotely anywhere near where we were even 6 months ago. That said, we are about, since the start of April now, around, roughly speaking, where we were at the start of March. So we've been at the point now where it's been approximately 10 weeks, and we have seen watch prices continue to fall, not collapse, but slide downward. And one of the things, though, that I've noticed with some of the watch YouTube channels that I follow, and I do subscribe to a number of them, is not everyone seems to be unified on what exactly is happening. And I don't mean necessarily just in the prediction to the future what might happen, because obviously what's going to happen in the future is a guess. It's as much my guess as it is anyone else's. But what I do think we are starting to see is some of the channels, especially those that seem to have a business of selling watches, especially if they have a business of selling secondhand watches, seem reluctant or resistant or blind to these declines. And where they do notice the changes, they seem to kind of be hung up on certain aspects of it. And the reason could be a mix of stuff. It could be what they see in their store with the type of watches they focus on. Maybe they're not seeing the same thing. But what we're seeing broadly does exist. And so that's why, to me, it comes across a little bit like blindness. And so, brand headlights. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Friday of all days. It's like the worst day ever to stream, is it not? Well, it used to back when I streamed pinball on Twitch, it was not a good day. It was not a good day. But let's throw some numbers up. So I think I got my screen share already. It's been a while since I've used this, so I apologize. But let's make me teeny. We don't need to see my head. There we go. There we go. There's some real sizing. All right. Now, this is watchcharts.com, and that's the site that I've typically turned to when we're talking about watch pricing. Now, is it the best site? I don't know. It's not dealer pricing, so that's something to factor in. The way watch charts, if I remember reading their methodology, is they're pulling private sale to private sale transactions mostly. It's coming from online sites like Watch You Seek, which is a watch forum, Reddit. They have a watch sales page, at least one big one. And so I think they've got something that scrapes those prices and pulls them together. So looking at this chart, and can we zoom in a bit? Of course, I can do what I want. There we go. All right. So looking a bit at this chart, this is a 6-month time frame. That's just, obviously you can see off to the side. You have to subscribe to get more data. And as interesting as this is, I don't know if they want the subscribe stuff shared, so I've not been inclined to go that deep. But this is an aggregate. It is the valuation of 30 watches averaged out. And they're taking all those numbers that they're scraping from all of these private secondhand, though, gray market-esque, non-used, non-AD sales, and coming up with what is that average value for the 30 hot watches at any given point. And so you can see with our 6 months worth of data, we had across all 30 of these a valuation of a little under $17,000 as of the middle of November. And that has gone all the way up till about April 1st, as I noted at the start of the video, when that went from $17,000 to about $25,000. But since then, And lines aren't always perfectly smooth, but since then we have seen this fall down to the most recent shot is today, and that's down to 22,500. So, I mean, it's fallen several $1,000s on the average. And hi, Kevin. Lakeland, huh? I haven't been to Florida in years. I don't think I've ever been to Lakeland, only to the Orlando area 2 or 3 times if I remember my life, which I think I kind of do. But welcome to the live stream. Not something I typically do. I haven't done a live stream since January, but I'm doing the best I can because I thought it might be fun to answer questions or learn new things to think about that I can put together in videos later on. So why do I throw this up here? And I mentioned some of the other YouTube channels earlier. There was one that I watched, and I won't, well, I guess I could name drop them. It's not particularly important. We all have our own opinions, but so one channel that I watched, they were talking about that. Oh, well, this is only the hot watches. It's only they call them hype watches. Only the hype watches are the watches that are really seeing a decline in price, and all the other watches are not. That's just not true. That's an incorrect statement. Maybe the watches, because he is a secondhand dealer, perhaps those watches of his that he's been bringing in have held steady because every watch is different. But it's beyond that. It's not just like Nautiluses and Royal Oaks that are falling. Okay. And that's why I've got a number of, you can see the tabs up at the top. You can see where I've already spoiled everything. I've loaded these all up here in my incognito Chrome window. But incidentally, as I scroll down, these are the watches that make up this list. And every one of mine from the tab is in there, but these aren't all quote unquote hype watches. The Seiko Skx007 is a popular watch, but I don't think anyone calls it a hype watch. Incidentally, I don't have a tab open on that one because that one's gone up. I will open it right now, in fact, so you can take a look. But you see, these are obviously ones that trade a lot. I mean, there's Speedmaster reduced, there's regular Speedmasters, there's Seamasters. I mean, all of these watches, if you've been into watches for a while, you probably recognize these names. And if not, you probably recognize what these watches look like. But it's all over the price spectrum. I mean, we've got G-Shocks in here all the way up to things like the Nautilus. So it's very interesting. And that AAGR you see off to the side, I think my mouse does show on the screen. You see off on the side there, that's about the change over the year. And that's where we get back to this graph. And we have to remember that when I say that there's a price decline, it's very recent. We see it's all since really April. When we think about the 30 watches as a collective, this is not remotely anywhere near where we were even 6 months ago, much less a year ago. So bear in mind that if the hope is by buyers, if you're like me and you want things to be cheaper, the hope would be that we want to see the pricing decline back to pre-pandemic levels. I think that's the dream for most buyers who haven't acquired a bunch of stuff and are now sitting on a ton of money in watches. But regardless of the perspective, that would be the thought. And we're not anywhere near that yet. The question is, will this path that we see over here continue to slide downward? And I think it will. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and explore some of these watches case by case. So as I mentioned, sorry about the ads, but incognito window. So Seiko Skx007, very, very popular dive watch, an entry point back when it was still made to a lot of people. There might be still some places you could possibly find this new in box, but generally, no, not anymore. And the pricing has kind of changed since then. So you see this watch, for example, has been going up in these last month or so, but also bear in mind, what are we talking about here? We're talking about something that was 6 months ago, $250 and is now $300. So $50 change, again, percentage wise, not insignificant. I mean, it's present, it's slight, but it's present. But in raw dollars, most people are probably not getting hung up on a $50 price point when they're talking about a watch, especially if they really want something like the 007 and don't want to settle for a Seiko 5, which the Seiko 5 models have kind of swooped in to replace the SKX models. They're not identical, of course. There are reasons why you would rather have this than you would an SKX if you're into diving, for example, because of the water resistance alone. And Brand Headlight says, I think the market needed to correct itself. And I agree. I think it's not just that the stress, for lack of a better word, of the watch prices getting so stupid. Can I say? Yeah, well, I guess it's my channel. I guess I can say what I want. Watch prices got stupid. But I don't think this is just like the bubble bursting and the watch prices correcting because watch prices got too high. I think the situation is that's a part of it. But stock market declines, inflation increases. China has actually been pretty resistant by and large to inflation increases. However, consumer demand in China is extremely low right now. And a lot of that ties to how, like in the Shanghai area, they are really doing a lot of lockdowns. And we don't mean lockdowns in the Western world philosophy. These are like hardcore lockdowns, coupled with in the pandemic response of China, there's not been a lot of funding provided to their citizens. So they have not, like, it hurts them fiscally a lot when they've been locked down. So I see Peter's in the chat and he's thrown a few things up. So let me highlight a couple of these. Hard to justify even paying that for the SKX when the 5KX has improved. And I'm totally ignorant of the 5KX, so I would not be able to explain where that stands versus what the SKX was. I see he notes that it was everything except ISO certification. I did know about the next point about that they've added hacking finally, which, you know, I didn't know there was. I knew there were watches that didn't hack, but I didn't know there were watch movements that didn't hand wind, and you actually had to shake. I've never owned a Seiko. I have a Grand Seiko after the changeover with the single branding. I have one of the, it's a now discontinued heritage model, but that's it. I've never actually owned a true Seiko. I've looked at a few, but it's just not one. When I've done lower cost like dive watches, I went with a rotary because it had really good specs. And so, as Peter knows, we know that no one's diving with these watches. That's that's true for, I think, a lot of the dive watches for most of the watch consumers, except desk diving. We like to mark these things up. Desk diving. Oh, this is I haven't reviewed this yet. I just got this a few days ago. This is the Tissot PRX, the quartz PRX. I was thinking I wanted to try an integrated bracelet watch, and I decided I want to pay twice the amount for the mechanical. So quartz it is. But anyway, okay, so that's my one exception. All these other ones we're going to go through, you're going to see the declines. And when they trigger and how steep they are, obviously it's going to vary. So let's talk Patek, right? The 5711, right? The 1A, right? You know, this is the watch everyone wants, right? I've always found the Nautilus an incredibly ugly watch. But it's super duper popular. And so you can see here we are. What I like about watch charts is it'll put out things like, okay, as of April of last year, the retail price on this watch was roughly $31,500, and the market average has been about $190,000. Now, again, you can see where at the middle of November, this was a $120,000, $121,000 watch, secondhand, and that's not going to like a David SW and buying. That was like buying from a private owner. So just remember that these are not gray market these are not gray market dealer prices. These are private but secondhand prices. So they will reflect the market, but they will be lower than, let's say we went to Chrono 24 and looked at their graphs. I would expect to see the same bend, but I would not expect to see the same dollar amounts because Chrono 24 is dominated by a lot of dealers. It does also have third-party private sales, but it's mostly dealers that I've seen at least. Anyway, again, just like that 30 aggregate number we pardon me, swallowed dust or something. My apologies. April 1st, kind of the peak, $230,000. So it jumped like 100,000. Got a cough again. This time I'll mute and be a little more respectful. But since then, a decline. And we're about 192,000. Not dramatic. You see there's let's zoom. Didn't mean to zoom that much. There's a bit of a fall off, and that bit of a fall off is like $1,000. But since then it has slid. And so now this is an example of a hype watch. This is a very hype watch. And so, okay, everyone seems to be in agreement that I've seen on YouTube, in articles, in the forums, that yes, this price is finally coming down. But again, it's not remotely even down as much as it was 6 months ago. It's got a long ways to go. I see Peter has noted, oh, he got the black dial PRX. Yeah, that one is, that was probably my third favorite. I really like the white one a lot with like the gold gilt, but I already have I already have another white dial watch. I actually never had a, well, no, let me not be wrong. I have had a blue dial watch before. I had a Vostok, but I gave that away to the guy actually who he didn't charge me to design my watches with Dennis logo. So I mailed him that watch as a thank you. And so I actually had no blue dial watch. So that's why I ended up with the blue dial PRX. And see, Brand Headlights says he likes the 3770. And welcome, Obese Tuna. Often a commenter on my videos. Thank you so much for the support of the channel. And he notes, because he's a UK viewer, I believe, in the UK, Pateks are a brand of curry powder. That sounds quite tasty, if not overly spicy. So let's move to another hype watch. Now apparently I have to zoom out again. Okay. So this is a Royal Oak, right? I always like the Royal Oak look a little bit better than what I think of the Nautilus myself. But again, it's out of my price bracket anyway, so what do I know? So this is the 15400 in steel. So much lower retail price, 18,500. But this, again, this is an older model. This price was as of 2016. Market average, 66,000. Again, similar but not identical behavior. This actually peaked out before April, in the latter half of March, but before April. And then it kind of held steady, went a little bit down and kind of held steady there. And then it's dipped again. So it's currently running at about 66,000. But again, 6 months ago, it was about 48,000. So long ways to go. But we do see a leveling off. And this very early, this new dip hasn't been since the start of May. So is this watch still going to slide down? I wouldn't be willing to say yes. Whereas with if we look back at the Patek, I think this is still going to keep going down a bit. But that's only because the drop was more recent. But it's hard to say. These are guesses. These are the best guesses I can do. So let's talk Rolex, right? So a hype watch, Daytona, yes, this would count as a hype watch. So here we are, a watch that peaked out again, latter about mid-March, $49,000. Where is it at right now? 44,000, a little over 44,000. Is it anywhere near where it was 6 months ago? No, that's 35,000. But this has been, I like this, and this makes more sense because there are more of these that trade. So we have more data points. But notice the slide here. This hasn't been a level off. This is a pretty consistent slide downward. And that's where I feel very strongly that this watch is going to continue to slide. There's nothing in the broad market, and we can touch on that a little bit later on in the video, but there's nothing in the broad market right now that makes me think, when we factor in the outside influences of where people like to spend money, be they rich or be they middle class, that suggests this would change. So why it's not going to stop sliding just because people have decided, well, I don't want my Rolex to be worth that little. It doesn't work like that. You think it would from a private individual point, but a lot of these watches aren't held by private individuals. And Design, greetings from Aruba. Hey, Design, it's been a while. It's been a while since I've hosted a video. I've seen your content continuing on YouTube, though. Thanks so much for stopping by. And I see OB says he might need to trade in his Timex Easy Reader. Yeah, I'm trying to say I've never owned a Timex. I bought one to fix an old mechanical, and I did not. I made a boo-boo and did not do enough research to know that was a terrible first mechanical watch to take apart and try and put back together. Anyway, I didn't get to the part of trying to put together a movement that was never meant to come apart. I destroyed the balance spring with my clumsy hands well before that point. But it sits in a bag of parts, along with many other watches I've worked on that I failed at. Only look at one more Rolex. Again, this is from the list of 30 top traded watches that Watch Charts relies upon. Again, this is a Submariner date version. This is the 116610. And so this is a watch that retails at about $9,000. Again, not super, this isn't as spiky as some of that other stuff. So I think we're getting less. Do we call the Rolex Submariner a hype watch? I struggle. It's pretty popular, but up until the pandemic, my understanding was this wasn't a watch you really had to waitlist very long to get. I know people that, and this was significantly before the pandemic, that said they could go into Rolex ADs and get Submariners. it wasn't special, you know. Oh yeah, it was watch associated with James Bond, and it was really popular, but they made a lot of them. So began mid-November. This was a watch that was trading at just under $14,000. It got up to about $15,500. Now this one's interesting because it peaked out earlier than anything else we've looked at right now. This peaked out at the start of March, and since then, as you can see in these numbers, it just has dropped more. It kind of held steady and dropped more again. We're still over 15,000, but we've lost about $500 off of it. The thing is that this would only need to lose about another $1,000, and we would be back to where it was 6 months ago. And I see Brand Headlights has said, what has not been talked about is that models that were underrated or obscure have come up in prices, and I believe they will hold their value much more than the rest of the watches. I think that's true. The thing that but I'd like to know, and as I see Design has asked for it, do you have an example of such a watch? An underrated watch that is now maybe appropriately rated, I guess would be the way that we would think of it. And Peter's comment, I completely agree with, and I think I was sort of hinting at it was, no, yeah, the Seamaster is iconic, but it's not a hype watch. I don't think there were a lot of third-party gray market people that were scooping up how could you? I mean, there's so many you can't corner them. Like I'd heard reports that there was a gray market dealer that was cornering the market on FP Journe, artificially driving up the prices because they controlled the sole supply of them. And now that's market manipulation, and that gets beyond what we've seen broadly in the pandemic. But case in point, I know a lot of people were following I guess it's the now defunct Timepiece Gentleman channel, but I believe from something I read on one of the forums, at one point they seemed to be like going really into Girard-Perregaux and like scooping up a bunch of those in the hopes that they would become a hype watch, which I don't believe happened. So the issue, of course, is, and why the prices will have to continue to slide, has to do with those flippers, the gray market. And if they're stuck with a lot of inventory that was hype, and now that hype is slipping, or the ability to acquire the hype is slipping. And yeah, as a beast owner knows, I've heard great things about Girard-Perregaux. I've never handled one, so I can't comment personally about them. I think they're attractive watches but not really my aesthetic, so I've never looked super closely at them. I've never heard anyone badmouth them. I've just heard that they're not a Patek. They don't, and maybe they're in the boat like JLC is, where people just don't seem to think about JLC. Like you go, oh yeah, JLC, they made the Reverso, and then they don't think about the quality behind it. Whereas with like a Patek or an AP, Holy Trinity sort of stuff, it just, they get a pass and they get to be hype. And if you're not that, then you're not. But and so I see Brand Headlights has given a couple examples of what he thought were not so talked about watches that have come up in prices. So he names the Neptune, which I'm vaguely familiar with. The Sculpture from Patek, I am not familiar with at all, nor am I familiar with VC's Phidias. I don't know that watch. I might look those up later. So anyway, Rolex, sliding down. Now we're definitely where no one's going to argue that there are hype watches in the sense of like the gray market. I vaguely remember when the pandemic hit, and the factories in Switzerland were shut down because we didn't have vaccines yet, and they were trying to prevent all of their workers from getting sick. There was a time where you had to wait a little bit to get Black Bays, a little bit, but it was only a few months. And there was that stretch where, and maybe that still happens to some extent, where Tudor releases a new model. It becomes hot, like immediately. People see that watches and wonders, like, oh, I gotta have it. I gotta have that Tudor. And it was always a Black Bay. And it was really hard to get for like 4 to 6 months. And then you can do what Rolex always wants you to do, and that is be able to walk into an authorized dealer and buy any Tudor you want. And so here's an example of that in action. So market average of about $3,400. This is the 79830, which is a GMT model watch. So back 6 months ago, it's about $3,550. Never really got too hot. Went up and down and up and down. Held fairly steady, but notice now. So we've got a clear example of a non-hype watch, and what's been happening since late March, early April. It's clearly sliding. And unlike all the other watches I've shown you so far, This watch is now worth less than it was 6 months at the start of 6 months, or mid-November, my 6-month time frame that we're using here. So clearly, going back to that YouTube statement I was criticizing at the start of my video about only the hype watches are sliding, that is false. That is flatly, provably, demonstrably untrue. Maybe they don't deal in Black Bay, so they didn't think about it. But I mean, it's a dangerous statement to say. In my mind, it's dangerous to say, yeah, this only affects really, really popular hype stuff. No, this slide is again, this is a popular watch, not a hype watch. It's popular. It trades a lot. A lot of people own these. Let's do another pretty popular watch. Let's do the Omega Seamaster 300. We'll do the 2531.80. This is the, I think this is the chronometer rated one. So again, iconic, not really hype. Never really heard about tons of people on wait lists. Another example, start of the 6-month period. This is a $2,750 watch. It went up. It went up at the start of the year, got up to about $3,000, about $3,050. And then as of mid-March, starts to fall. Had a little uptick, starting back to fall again. It's currently at about what? 2,700, little over 2,700. It's actually, again, by about $30 lower than it was at the start of 6 months ago. So this watch is down versus 6 months. And again, the trend line, there are blips and exceptions based off of whatever is going on in the market, but this is definitely lower than this. And that's my point. I see Peter has said, Tudor is starting to creep into Rolex territory with availability. Their designs are straight ripping off the Rolex pieces. Yeah, what was the new one? The Black Bay Pro that looks like the Explorer 2. It was very, very, very hard. And by hard, I mean impossible to not see, what was it, the 1655, that old like original Explorer 2 look in. I mean, just in it, except it was 20 inches thicker. I'm joking. Wasn't that much thicker, but it was thicker. A couple other non-hypes I wanted to show that make up part of that 30. Breitling, this is a Navitimer. This is the GMT 46. So again, here we are, the start of the 6-month period. This is a $4,500 watch. It got up to being a $4,700 watch. It's back to being a $4,500 watch. Total restoration back from where it was 6 months ago. And will it keep falling? Yeah, it's kind of shaky. So I think, yeah, but probably, I don't think it's going to fall off a cliff. But it also is not a hype watch, but it's down. It's clearly down from where it was in mid-March. And the last one, I did a whole video on several Panerais, and this one was in there because a ton of these trade. So this is the PAM 104. It's one of the Luminor watches. And I want to note that the retail price of this watch, when it was still produced, was a $7,000 watch. I just think that's interesting because it's not, this is a watch that has secondhand traded below this is how watches are supposed to be. It's supposed to be worth less after you walk, you drove it off the lot. It's been devalued. That's how most watches should be, right? It's like a car. It's like any other asset. So here it was, started 6 months ago, $4,500, almost $4,600. It got up to the 4,700s. And then it started held average until the start of April. And then that's the sound of deflation. So here it is, 4,100, well below where it was at the start of 6 months ago, and well below what these things sold for originally. Now, part of this is probably that Panerai charges too much, and Panerai has some other issues going along with the controversy over what they counted as an in-house movement. I know some people still begrudge them for that, even though that was a while ago. More recently, again, not this model, but other Panerai watches about the formerly, somewhat decorated or somewhat finished movements now being more basic and just sort of downstepped, but acting like nothing's different and still charging what you wanted to charge in the first place on the watches. So it's like, it's interesting. And you can go and check out my insert Dennis plug here. You can go check out my video on the Panerais because I put another Luminor in and I put 2 radio mirrors in. The radio mirrors have been kind of holding steady. They're not really seeing this bit. They haven't seen much of a decline. You might be able to kind of detect a slight one. It's very, very slight though. This and another Luminor, they have since the peak within the 6 month period that I examined, which is it's a little bit sooner than I did it a few days ago. So it's not exactly the same data, but both of them, from peak value in the 6-month period to the current value in the 6-month period, which I think my cutoff then was May 9th, is over 10% loss in value. So again, don't just think in terms of raw dollars. That's helpful for knowing like what a human being is willing to absorb, like when it comes to an SKX. But that double-digit percentage drops are significant drops. This is not a hype. This is not a hype watch. These are not hype watches. So that's kind of where what I wanted to show with the data. And now why I think this is going to keep happening. I hinted at it a few times. We talked a little bit about it. I mentioned the China thing, but the volatility in the market, and by the market, I don't mean the watch market, I mean the stock market. I think that is the testament to the biggest barriers that we are seeing to any sort of recovery on the pricing for the gray market. And I'm not going to dive into much. I'm not an investor. I can't give you investment advice. And I don't recommend watches for investment period anyway. It's just not the way to me, it's a hobby. And so that's not how I approach it. But here's where I think the pressure is going to come in from on the watch side. Given that we know that the markets are not expected to, just immediately recover. They're going to have up days and down days. But until we get a clamp on inflation in the US and a lot of Western Europe, that's going to be a big driving factor, is controlling inflation, not making money cheap to borrow so that equity investments are, more lucrative than bond investments. So saying all that aside, let's talk gray market. Let us say that you were someone who bought a lot of these hype watches like Nautiluses, or you gambled on Gerard Perregaux, or you thought that the Royal Oaks were surefire. And let's go back to the 30 watches in this chart. So let's just say, again, depends which watches, of course. Some of these still have not slid like the SKX, but let's say this is kind of what the state of your gray market inventory looks like right now. Let's say you bought, and here you're fine still, right? You're fine. If you were paying an average of $17,500 per watch, you're able to get out of them right now $22,500. That's good. That's great. The problem is more like people who thought this line goes up. The line must go up. The line should be up. It should be up here, right? It should be up here right now. That was the trend, but it's not. So let's say they bought here, the March 28th value, $25,000 average per watch. And now here you are at under 23,000. So let's just round up to 23,000 versus 25. And let's say that you have 20 watches. That's $40,000 in loss right there. Your 20 watches are $2,000 less than what you paid for them. Don't forget your overhead. Or do you have physical space that you're paying rent on, utilities, staff costs, your ability to eat? All of these expenses are supposed to be coming out of that profit, but you don't have profit anymore. You're already $2,000 underwater on just a flat out trade value on those watches. So that's the interesting challenge. And what if it's not this? What if it's not $2,000? Let's go back to the 5711, the Nautilus. Let's say you bought right around, I don't even do the high point there, 217,000, and now they're 191,000. So let's move that to 200 and move that to 215, $15,000 on one watch. And so let's do math with Dennis is too hard. So I got to get out my calculator. So let's say you had the 20,000. Let's say you had 20 watches. They were all Nautiluses that you paid 215,000 for. And now they've lost $15,000 in value just over the last, six to 8 weeks. That's $300,000 off the table that you just lost. And that is where I think it would be so hard for this line to bend back up right now, because the market's not going to do it, right? The stocks aren't going to do it. In inflation, all right, if you're US oriented, the Fed has instituted another inflation increase. It takes stock market aside, which responds very, very quickly. It takes approximately 1 year for an interest rate adjustment in the United States to actually have impact on the US economy as a whole. It's that slow. That's why they do it in little increments. and because they're trying to read the tea leaves too and know, because they don't want to raise the interest rates too much because it makes it really, really expensive to borrow and your credit card becomes obscene. So here we are, and there are all these people that are holding inventory. And let's be a little more direct. Let's say that some of these dealers got in at the start of this line goes up, and get this out of my face's way. They got in around here, and every watch they bought just went up in value. And I think there's been a proliferation of this. There sure has definitely been on YouTube, right? There are all sorts of people that have, it's probably less than I feel like. I don't subscribe to these channels, but I've seen a few of their episodes. Entities about, the trade, the hustle, the grind, whatever it is. And I have my own thoughts on that type of work, but it doesn't matter if you agree with it or disagree with it. It's easy to make money when everything goes up, right? It's easy to feel like you're a genius when every watch you bought has gone up in value, but you didn't make it do any of that. This took no skill. Any idiot could have bought watches here and would have made money if they sold up here or here or here or here or here or here. They'd have made money the entire time. So I think you just had a lot of people who thought this was really easy because during this stretch of ridiculous price increases, it was. I mean, how many things can you think of where you might be able to go, as long as you had enough capital, enough liquid cash to be able to make the initial purchases on 5711s and then sell them a week later, and you always made money no matter when you did it. You buy the same 5711 back, 2 months later and sell it 1 week after that, and you'd still make money. Took no thought. So you had a lot of, I think there's been a huge infusion to people who saw this as a real easy job, who don't actually, maybe they may or may not know anything about watches. They definitely don't know much about markets if they've been stuck holding all these hype pieces. So that's what I think is going on. And that's why I don't think the line can bend back up. Even if private sellers would be comfortable, some of these people are going to be put under so much strain that they have to unload. And I see Obese Tuna made a remark about, I guess that the answer is buy what you actually like. As an enthusiast, as a person into watches, as a collector, absolutely. And also as a collector, if you want to consider, value, and you flip through watches a lot and you don't want to take a bath on any of them, I'd say factor that in. Completely legitimate. I can't say it wouldn't totally based off of what I've seen with Panerais, I would never buy one new ever. I'm like, it just looks like you're taking a ridiculous loss. If I was into the Panerais design, I'll tell you what I would do. I would buy one used, and that would be that. And then I wouldn't probably take as much of I understand I'm going to lose value on a lot of stuff. For me, that's okay. And there are still watches that have kind of gone up that may always be safe in some regard. I mean, again, like if you can get a Rolex at retail, why would you? Nothing about this would make you think that you're not going to be fine, because the values are still so far above AD pricing that's just the way it is. I have a couple of Rolexes, and I've checked their Chrono 24 averages because I have them loaded in the collection tool. Those prices haven't changed much, but both of mine are discontinued. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. They also weren't like Daytonas and ridiculous either. So, it's just one of those aspects. But but let's set that aside. If we're not the Obese Tunas of the world and we're able to buy what we like, but we actually got into this as a business and we're sitting on, a dozen Daytonas and a dozen 5711s, you got to eat at some point, right? So there are only two options you have, broadly speaking. You either try and weather this for the prices to go back up, with the question that you don't, especially now that you've realized you got into this in 2020, you have no idea how the watch market works. You've never been in a downturn before, and you might not have any business skills whatsoever. What would make you think this is ever going to go back up in time before you die? I'm being a little melodramatic, and by a little, obviously, I mean a lot melodramatic, but the line's going down. You don't know how to you understand what the line's doing. What forecasting would you have to be able to say if and when the line would go back up so that you don't lose any money? And could you survive that long? Is it worth it would you take so much damage to yourself? Is it worth weathering it to be able to sell the watches back at what you paid for them? Or do you cut your losses? And that's where the question is does this continue to be a slide or does this shift? And that's where, we go down a little bit and now it's started to get more aggressive. That's where, again, these are not dealers. This is just the general pricing, but between private individuals, like if Obese Tuna and I were selling each other watches, this is what these numbers are. So the gray market would typically be same pattern, should be roughly the same pattern, but higher, because they charge more, be higher up. But here's the other factor. Instead of trying to weather it, and let's say you looked at that and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know. And line goes up, and that's all you've ever known. And now here you are, and you're trying to figure out, like, you got to do math and actually do forecasting. Forecasting that is not a question of does it go up 10% or 20%, but rather forecasting of will this watch go down another 10% in the next 2 months or not. So the other option is, do you get out now and lose your $15,000 per Nautilus, or do you wait 2 more months until you're out of cash and lose 30? Because what if it keeps going down? Now, I don't know it's going to go down to a 30 loss from that peak. That is a blind, I'm not even going to call that a guess. I'm just making up numbers. But if that were to happen, and the trend suggests it's possible that it could happen, you'd be even in worse shape. You not only spent down cash over 2 months hoping for a better position, you now get even less than had you just not cut, tackle, and run. And that, I think, is where the pressure is going to be mounting right now. Right now, I think a lot of gray market and, checking prices on some of the big gray market sites that have been around before the pandemic, so they're probably more sophisticated on it anyway. A lot of them have been trying to hold prices pretty close, or only taking them down a little bit. And if they've got the reserves, they could probably manage to navigate something. Those, like the backpack flipping, I just went around and bought a bunch of rainbow Daytonas because they're so hot right now, especially if you're not diversified and you really went all in on one hype watch, and that hype watch is taking a bath. I mean, you look at these things, and some aren't as bad as others. Like if it's this version of the Royal Oak, the 15400, that's not too bad yet. In terms of raw dollars, we're talking maybe a $5,000 per watch loss. You went for 5711s. Ouch. Ouch. So let's see. I see some of you have made some comments, and I was going off on a soliloquy there, so I apologize for that. Brand Headlight says, great insights of the market. It may also mean that this may take out a lot potential customers that lost money when the values of their watch went down when they bought at a premium. Yes, there's definitely a possibility. Obese Tuna notes that in the end, the free market will always reach equilibrium. Yeah, if the markets are functioning as they should, barring market manipulation, that would be what we would expect. Mr. Bud, welcome, Mr. Bud. I don't think I'd seen you in the chat before. Wash out the flippers, please, so I can walk into an AD and sit down and buy a nice watch. It's been, there's so many, I would agree. There have been, there was a time where I wanted to explore the idea of getting a no date sub, and then finding out that I couldn't walk in and buy one retail. I won't pay the used prices because they're more than retail. And to me, I'm like, Rolex is already saying this is a $9,000 at most watch. Why would I pay 14? And if you love it, you might be able to get around that mentally. I can't. So I did what was hinted at, I think, from Brand Headlights earlier. I started looking at other watches that, not like homages, not substitutes for the Submariner, but looking for other things that I wanted to explore. And that's where I, like Glashütte Original and the Panamanic Reserve, or the Panamanic Lunar, and why I'm like, okay, very different watch, but very cool to me. Something to think about on that regard. Or a Santos. I've looked at Santoses over Santai. I don't know. How do we plural that? Just Santos? I don't know. All sorts of things like that. And yes, this, that. So I think that's the main stuff I wanted to touch on. I didn't know if there were any other points or questions. I figured an hour is probably enough. I guess it's only been live 45 minutes, but hey, we do what we want. It's a Friday. I'm tired. I'm drinking my diet sun-kissed oranges, prattling on about pricing like I know any more than anyone else. The only difference is that there's data. I saw somewhere, I think someone had shared one of my videos on Rolex forums. I'm not a member of the Rolex forums, but you get alerted on the YouTube thing where views are coming from. So I went and saw it, and I saw someone didn't really like Watch Charts as a data source. I tried to find other part of it is Watch Charts doesn't like their data. Like, they're very protective of non-commercial, well, not even non-commercially, just uses outside of their site. So that's not a big deal when I do my videos, because I hand record the values that I see and I build my own charts. I think it looks better than what we did with the screen share here anyway. And plus, I don't need a data point every single day. That's just too many data points. We just need enough to see the trend of the line. But Chrono 24, I thought about them. They don't have it on all their watches. They don't do any sort of market averaging. Plus, it's so dealer skewed. I've wondered. That's the only other good one. I found a couple other places that do price charting, but they like, one of them was, it didn't seem like they were updated since 2020. That is not very helpful. I don't, if we were to look at the data of 2020, it would just be depressing. Unless any of you are watch flippers, watch gray market dealers, then you might have loved it. I bet 2020, 2021 were great years for you. For me, I didn't really get into collecting until the pandemic. I blame having the internet and watches being able to come to your door. And my other main hobby, the hobby I actually spend more time in, I don't do YouTube for it really, but I do podcasts and stuff, and that's pinball. And pinball in a pandemic was terrible because you have to go usually and pick up the machines yourself. These are 250 to 350 pound devices. And, you need to go into people's homes, and there's a lot of close contact, and then a watch was so much easier. And pinball pricing has actually had the same thing happen that watches have had. The only difference is the pinball pricing hasn't started to slide down yet. And that's mostly because there's so many, with watches, we have so many choices. If you don't like Longines, you can turn to Tissot. You don't like Tissot, you can turn to Seiko. You don't want Seiko, you can turn to Orient. Yeah, I know some of these are under the same groupings. That's why I picked 2 Seiko companies and 2 Swatch. But my point is, there are lots and lots and lots of watch manufacturers. Pinball, if you want new pinball, there are only about 6. And there's only one really big one, and all the rest are pretty small. So this is it's just a different thing. I don't know about the spam, so let's block that out. So anyway, that's it for the stream. I'll just say thanks everyone who chose to tune in. I hope you have a great day, and take care, everybody. See you.